Recently, I did a video on RSS feed for various websites, and I was surprised by the number of comments I got asking what an RSS feed was. Now, I'd assumed that the only people who are actually going to click on that already knew, but you know what? Let's actually go and explain what an RSS feed actually is and how we actually go and use it. So RSS is an acronym with two generally accepted readings: Resource Description Framework Site Summary, which I've never heard anyone actually use, probably because it's just way too long, and the one that I prefer is Really Simple Syndication. So the absolute shortest answer for what RSS is it's a format for doing syndication on the web. But the nice thing about RSS, and this isn't just true about RSS, it applies to other formats like this as well, is that it makes no statement on what you can actually syndicate. So this could be an RSS feed for a blog, it could be for news, it could have links to a podcast, links to videos, it could be used for torrents. Basically, anything that you can structure into a list of elements, along with metadata associated with those elements, can be structured into an RSS feed. This metadata highly depends on what you're trying to syndicate, so it can be things like the author, the upload date, the original place this content came from, a description, some tags, basically anything that you want to describe what you're actually syndicating. Now, in web years, RSS has been around basically forever. So the original version of RSS came out back in 1999, at least that's when it was released publicly. It may have been used in some other form prior to then. But since that point, the latest release of RSS came out in 2009. This was RSS 2.0. Since then, there hasn't been a major update to it, but this is probably because there's just no reason to actually do so. Now, technically, when you refer to RSS, you're only referring to the RSS feed itself, but generally an RSS feed is going to be pretty useless, at least to a person without an RSS feed reader. But before we get into the reader itself, let's talk about what the feed actually is. So an RSS feed is based on the XML format. Now, XML stands for Extended Markup Language, and if you've never seen it before, basically think of HTML, but instead of defining the layout of a web page, it defines data and what that data actually means. So this right here, if opened on the correct page, this right here is... Okay, my browser crashed. Try it again. This right here is a RSS feed. As I said before, if you've ever looked at HTML before, this will look very similar. Basically, every single bit of data in here is wrapped in some sort of tag. So let's say the description right here. So this basically says, okay, this bit of data right here is a description. So when you go to a feed reader, that feed reader knows, okay, if I see the description tag, I do something with it. But the thing about an RSS feed is even though you have these tags in here which tell you what the data means, it doesn't tell you how to display the data. So for example, this right here is a URL. Now in some RSS feed readers, this might mean show the URL. In some other RSS feed readers though, it might say embed the URL, and if it has an image on it, then display the image. But the RSS feed itself doesn't make any statement on what you actually should do with the data. Basically, this means that the data and the layout of the data have become completely decoupled. Now, I imagine the reason why XML was chosen for this project rather than any other format that existed at the time is because XML was just the cool thing you do for any sort of data transfer back in the late 90s. Just like how JSON is the cool thing now, and if you want to do any sort of data transfer, it's just done in JSON. There's no reason it has to be done in JSON. That's just what everyone does. And in 10 years from now, it'll probably be some different format because there's no reason why you can't use JSON for an RSS feed sort of style because there is already a JSON syndication format. It's just that JSON didn't exist back when RSS was being created. Now, because this is an extended form of XML, this is not intended to be read by a person. Obviously, you can go and read this. It is just a plain text file. It's not like it's a binary format or anything like that. But it is just a massive waste of time to go and read an RSS feed directly. So this is why we use an RSS feed reader, or some people like to call them news aggregators. Personally, I'm not a big fan of news aggregator just because it sort of implies that you can only use RSS feeds for news, whereas as I mentioned earlier, you can use them for podcasts and various other things like that, and you do heavily use them even if you don't realize that. So in short, an RSS feed reader is something that takes this XML nonsense here and then turns it into something that's actually usable. So my RSS feed reader of choice is something called Newsboat. So this is a terminal-based application. And I'm just using this mainly to look at things like subreddits. So if we go into, say, this one right here, basically every single post on this subreddit has been turned into a post on this RSS feed. So if I want to go and say, I don't know, read the content of this post right here, as you can see, this one just contains links. That was a bad example. Let's say this one here. This one has a link, and then whatever the person wrote as the content of the post, and it shows some other things as well, but this is sort of how Newsboat decided to actually interpret the data. But then some other feed reader might decide to take the exact same tags that are in this feed right here, and then show them in a completely different way. So I like to use a terminal-based feed reader because most of what I see is going to be images. Now, occasionally a Reddit post will have an image attached to it, but if I want to go and see that image, I'll just go into my web browser. But if you do want to have that actually in the application, I would recommend actually using a GUI option. Now, I don't have a personal favorite GUI RSS feed reader. Just go look up top 10 best FOSS RSS feed readers, and you'll find something that you'll probably like. Now, Newsboat is a fairly generic RSS feed reader, so it doesn't specify any, extra tags that need to be there to show data correctly, but there are some RSS feed readers that do that. So, for example, iTunes. Now, iTunes you might not even think of as an RSS feed reader, but I'll get into that in just a moment. So, right here we have some extra tags that are defined just to make this feed work properly inside of iTunes. So, defining things like the iTunes title or the iTunes episode type or the iTunes episode. These are things to make this feed work properly inside of iTunes. Now, you might be asking, okay, why does iTunes use RSS feeds? Well, the reason why they do that is because the entire podcasting industry is built on RSS feeds. Now, Spotify is trying to do their own thing, and we're not going to talk about Spotify today, but every single other podcasting app, it loads in RSS feeds, and that is how it actually gets the links to the podcast episodes. Now, sometimes you pass the link in explicitly, sometimes you go and search for the link through an interface, but it always uses an RSS feed. So if you want to go and watch a podcast like mine, there'll be a link to that one down below. Basically, your podcasting app is going to say, hey, here is the RSS feed for Tech Over Tea. Here are the episodes that it has. Here are the titles for those episodes. Here are the descriptions. Here's whether it's explicit or not, so on and so forth. And that's how it gets all of its data. And that's why you may have noticed that on basically every website for a podcast, somewhere on the web page, you'll see this little orange button with some little curved lines on it for like signals. This is an RSS feed button. Do whatever you want with the RSS feed. Now, the reason why I like RSS feeds for subreddits is because I find most of Reddit to be a massive waste of time, and if I'm on the Reddit website, I typically go to other subreddits that I don't actually need to go to. When I go to Reddit, basically the only reason I ever go there is to farm video ideas, and I generally don't care about the comments. Occasionally, the comments will be intriguing, like if someone's saying, hey, what are your favorite CLI apps or things like that? In that case, I'll go directly to that post. I don't want to have to go to it from the Reddit website though. And I know for some people, the exact same applies to YouTube as well. They just want to see the content from the creators they care about. They don't want to deal with like YouTube recommendations. They don't want to deal with ads. They just want to see what they want to see and be done from there. And getting an RSS feed for a channel page is basically a way you can go and do that. Sadly though, a lot of big websites used to have RSS feeds and then decided to remove them, or they still have them and still maintain them, but for some reason they just don't show it to the user at all, and that seems like a massive waste of effort to me. But luckily, RSS feeds are still being kept alive by blogs and podcasts and news websites, so hopefully as some of these false alternatives to YouTube and Twitter and things like that keep getting bigger, they keep the RSS feeds around so we don't repeat the exact same problem. So I think that's going to be pretty much everything for me, but before I go, I would like to thank my supporters. So a special thank you to Chris, Joachim, Donald, Michael, Andre, Nathan, David, Montezar, Will, Chico Bento, Joseph, Mitchell, Peter D, Tony Tushar, and all of my $2 supporters. If you'd like to go support words, support my work, links down below. I've got my podcast, Tech Over Tea, available basically anywhere. And then this channel is available on Odyssey, Library, and BitChute. If you want to watch my content on a platform that isn't YouTube. This recording went really well, and the outro is going really badly. Thank you guys for watching, and I'm out.